But let me just share a little about you, just so some of the students who aren't familiar with your work know a little about you. But Professor Mary Jo Sharp is assistant professor of apologetics at Houston Baptist University. She's a founder and director of Confident Christianity Apologetics Ministry, an international speaker on apologetics with a focus on love and logic, using love and logic to uncover the truth. She was featured in Christianity's Today's cover story, The Unexpected Defenders, which is being made into a Marvel movie, I believe. It sounds like the
new Ghostbusters. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that'd be a good Marvel movie. She lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband and family. She's the author of Why Do You Believe That? It's a Bible study. She's the author of this book, Why I Still Believe, a former atheist's reckoning with the bad reputation Christians give to a good God, which this is what we're mostly going to be talking about. Actually, I first came across your name in the book, Come Let Us Reason, and your essay in there, which was among some pretty, heavyweights in the world of apologetics, William Lane Craig, Paul Pan, J.P. Moreland, and Gary Habermas were all on this book. And then there's Mary Jo Sharp, Does the Story of Jesus Mimic Pagan Mystery Stories, which I found that extremely helpful because at that time I was looking into that because I would hear that a lot. So it was very helpful. So first question is a simple yes or no question. Does the story of Jesus mimic pagan mystery stories?
No.
No? Okay, there you have it, everybody.
Yeah, it's actually not that simple. It's kind of yes and no, because there are similar elements like there are in any kind of religion.
Right.
Yeah. But the problem is the vague similarities aren't proof of borrowing. It's so I was addressing the copycat theory in there where it's, Jesus, it's the Bill Maher version, right? Jesus's story must have been ripped from these other stories because there's similarities, and that's not enough to show that Jesus's followers actually ripped that story from earlier religions.
Right.
So it's a bad argument.
Yes. So this is, something, again, when we get to the Q&A, if any of the students want to ask about, because I'm sure they hear that a lot. This is more, not even a question, it's more of a, let people know you're a real person who just doesn't read books and write. You used to be a music teacher.
Yeah.
So tell us a little about that. What did you teach? We have a few musicians with us, I think.
All right. So ever since I was a sophomore in high school, I wanted to teach music. I wanted to actually direct band, since you're all, I think, mostly Americans, you know what I'm talking about there. So I wanted to have my own high school band or whatever, and then go on in college to get a master's degree in music, and then go off and become the Boston Pop Symphony Orchestra conductor. So I would be replacing the guy that wrote all the music to Harry Potter and Star Wars. So I always tell people I like to dream small, but I love music. I have ever since I was a child. My parents really did teach me a love of music. My dad was a clarinetist and a saxophone player, and I also am a saxophonist. So that's what I play. I taught, my main people were junior high. I love junior high band kids. They're so weird and they're awesome. And band was our safe space. We all kind of hung out there. We ate lunch together. That was our place to be band people. And the only reason I moved on from music really is because of my story, part of my story about doubting my faith and then landing in this field of apologetics, which I didn't mean to be in.
Okay. So we're going to get to it later, talking a little about beauty and God. So here's a half serious question for you. Why is contemporary Christian music so bad?
This is being recorded, right? Let's see, a political way of
I'm just kidding. You don't have to answer
that. There's some good stuff. There's some not as good stuff, and that's what you find throughout. I'll say this. This is not answering your question, but I will say that as a classically trained musician who has an undergrad in music education, that I am concerned when people do not have a broad background in music. So they only know rock and roll, or they only know, music that plays around with only 4 chords each song. It's kind of like the fast food version. Like, there's good fast food out there, really good. I'm a Chick-fil-A fan, but there's also banquets out there, So I am concerned when people don't have an appreciation of some of the older music that we have, and then the world music. So they're not really exposed to that. I actually think it causes some of the worship wars in our churches.
Yeah.
That lack of breadth to their musical experience.
No, that's a good point.
That was a good avoidance, wasn't it? I just like.
Yeah, it was good.
Them.
Very, very political.
Politician.
Very good. Yeah, like I said, good. So you weren't raised. So this is more just for a little, getting to know you. But you weren't raised in a Christian home. So could you, quickly share your testimony? How you went from, you're basically raised atheist. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So
you want me to share a little
about that? Yeah.
So I am from Portland, Oregon, and we've been considered sort of a post-Christian society for some time. You can find articles dating back to the 50s and 60s of about the non-religious participation of Oregonians. So we've been considered that way for some time now. And so not being raised in the church, along with that aspect of my culture, I didn't know a whole lot about Christianity. And my parents had left the church when I was too young to remember. And I've had some conversations back and forth with my mom on this various why she left the church. There's some anger there. And so I grew up without it in my life. And like I said, didn't know. I knew what I knew about Christianity, mostly from television and the movies. It's a pretty shallow view of Christianity. But what I did have was parents who were just like avid science and nature buffs and avid arts fans. So they raised me with a very rich cultural upbringing in all these different areas. And so I think I began to wonder at all of the beauty and goodness and truth that I was finding in the world, and especially beauty really impacted me. I began to wonder, what is all this for? Especially also when I would be playing music. So I had a very good high school band. And as I'm sitting in the middle of a performance and just awash in all of this beauty, this glorious sounds, I'm thinking, is this it? Like, what is this for? What do we do with this? And so there's that aspect of kind of, as I'm growing older, I'm starting to ask harder questions. And at that time in my life, I had a high school band director who was burdened for me. He's a Christian who was burdened for me. And he was very cautious about sharing his faith with a public school student, but he just couldn't get out of his mind that he needed to do something. So my senior year of high school, he actually witnessed to me by giving me a Bible and saying, "Hey, when you go off to college, you're gonna have hard questions. I hope you'll turn to this." And he gave me an NIV 1-year Bible. So he kind of hit me at the right time, right place at the right time kind of thing. And I began to read that Bible. And by the time I'm going off to college, I'm a person who thinks there's probably a God, so I need to figure this out. And I go off to college to explore faith. What? We're all worried about kids going off and leaving faith, right? And I'm like, wow, I'm free. I can finally just do, like go to church. And so I start going to churches on my own. And eventually I attended a church where I understood the need for a savior. And by that point, I was ready to trust in Jesus for my salvation.
Did the apologetics stuff come later after that, or was it kind of mixed in?
Yeah, there wasn't an apologetic before. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Okay.
So that came after I doubted what I believed.
Okay. Yeah, so it's interesting because you hear so many stories nowadays about, deconstruction and then deconversion, right? And then there's some people that have gone through this process of deconverting and then, deconstructing, but then kind of rebuilding their faith again, where you were basically going from the ground up, right? There was really no foundation to begin with other than the little you knew from TV. Is that right?
And the movies. Don't forget, like The Exorcist.
Right. Yeah. I learned all my theology from The Exorcist.
There's some good study of the problem of evil going on in there. I'm just saying.
So going through all that, do you have any like thoughts on, for our students that might wrestle with doubt from time to time? Like how should a Christian or someone who's exploring Christianity think about questions of doubt and, maybe not being totally secure about certain things? Any thoughts on that or advice for our student?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to make sure I'm free people up to have doubt, because when you look at what's going on in Luke 7 with the questions that John the Baptist is asking of Jesus when John has been imprisoned by Herod. And here's John the Baptist, the prophesied messenger of the Messiah. He's in prison. Things aren't going the way, I don't know, either he thought they would or something's going on there. And so he sends his followers out to Jesus to ask him, hey, are you the Messiah? Are you the one to come, or should we look for another? So what I want to say is, first of all, if John the Baptist can have doubts about who the Messiah is or who Jesus is, certainly the rest of us can, right? I mean, certainly we can. And then if you read that passage, keep reading on about how Jesus treats John in front of the mass there, the group of people. He uplifts John. He doesn't tear him down for having this question. And that should be sort of a lesson to us that you're going to go through hard times in life. Like he was facing his own death. He was facing uncertainty. Probably, I don't know if he expected to die or not, but he did. And so there are things in life that can burden you, that can trouble you to the point of having these questions like, God, are you really there? Are you really the resurrected Lord? Why do I say I believe in this? I need some help. And if you read that story, you find out it is absolutely okay to have these doubts. And that was something that I didn't know, that I had to discover on my own journey into apologetics. Like that was part of like my journey towards apologetics. I was answering my own doubts because people in the church were just not engaging. I didn't know that anybody in the church had doubts because nobody talked about it. Everybody acted like they had faith or like, of course God's real. And I never encountered another person that would ask these kind of questions like, well, wait, how do we know he's real? How do we know the Bible's trustworthy? Things like that. And so I just want to free you guys up to have those doubts, because no matter where you're at now, life just changes. There's a lot of struggles, and you may have already been through some of that. So it gets hard, and there is a lot of evil in this world. So it can cause you to question things. So please feel freed up to do that. But also go looking for those answers. Don't just ask. I've been around some people that have asked the same question over and over and over for many years and haven't seemed to make any progress on it. And there's a lot of material out there, especially now with this renaissance of apologetics in the 21st century. So please do go search for those answers because they're out there.
Yeah, great. And when you going to your book. So your book's subtitle is "A Former Atheist Reckoning with the Bad Reputation Christians Give a Good God." So that really jumped out at me when I first saw it, especially the bad reputation Christians give to a good God. So, I know in the book you share a lot about, just the conflict you had once you started attending a church or became part of a church. I know there was some conflict after you were married when you set up a dance routine, like a worship dance routine, where one of the pastors said the clothing was inappropriate, even though you went out of your way to make sure it was very conservative. And he actually used a pretty harsh word to describe how the ladies were dressed. So obviously, like, this is something that really burdens me because I came to Christ at 31, so as an adult. And I've really only been in two churches, and both have been very good experiences. But I know so many Christians who've had so many bad experiences in churches, and it's just very upsetting to hear that. So based, just on your experience, do you want to share a little about some of that conflict and just, again, advice to people who maybe are having a hard time finding a church to call home, or where they feel like they're really comfortable? I know that's a heavy thing, but it's like something that really jumped out at me while reading your book.
Yeah. Well, I will say that first of all, I didn't want to write the book because of the personal nature of the story. Like, it's much easier to just get on here and present an argument to you guys and let you beat it up. Because if you're beating up an argument, I can hide behind it. And I can just, you don't have to know me. You just beat up my argument and I can argue with you. Well, this, that, we can throw logic back and forth. So for me, the writing of this book was letting you into a little bit of like that process of how these arguments played into my development with staying in the church, with, refine, like you said, I had kind of, I was deconstructing faith, but I was kind of reconstructing it based on these apologetic arguments. So the kinds of conflict that I kept noticing over and over, there's a lot. I think I was frequently, like I've been putting language to this, I was frequently marginalized for being an intellectual believer. So like I mentioned about doubt, people weren't comfortable with questions. And my husband got involved with ministry while we were still very young Christians. We got involved with youth ministry. So that added to that like problem in that I'm a staff wife. So for me to have questions is not considered, it's the unspoken inappropriateness. Like you're not allowed to do that, but that's not written down anywhere. Just, you're not allowed to do that. So, like a pastor can be on stage preaching absolute heresy and, and like, it's inappropriate for me to go and say, hey, you just changed the nature of God or the Trinity or something, So I think that combined with the fact that I was growing up, I was one of those kids that my parents encouraged me to do whatever I wanted. I was like, hey, just go, my dad wanted me to be a lawyer or be a doctor or something like that. And there was never, my parents never placed like, oh, you're a girl, you need to go talk to the girls about girl stuff. And when I got into the church, that is exactly what I experienced. Oh, all the ladies are going to go over here and talk about ladies' important things like children and whatever. I don't know. Not that children are important, but it was always the separating out. So like the guys are going over there and I was not invited and I'd never experienced this sort of like, oh, you're a girl, go away. So that was a shock for me. And I think the fact that that combined with the fact that I'm also from the Northwest. And so I didn't fit the Southern culture and I didn't feel like it. I wasn't trained in it. I didn't know how to be in it. That was very hard for me. And I don't know if any of you are from different places in the country, if you're all like East Coasterners, but there's a definite way that you're raised in a feel like Northwesterners aren't overly friendly. It's not that we don't like you. It's just that we don't want to be fake. We don't want to like say, hey, I'm your best buddy, and then like stab you in the back. So we're those kind of people that like, we will be good to you as we get to know you. But we're a little standoffish on the front end. We're private people. So
sounds like New Jersey.
Okay. So I think I was like, the fact that I was such a go-getter. I was just such a, hey, I can do anything. And I didn't, and then I also didn't fit their culture. And then how do we say, I'm not hard, I'm easy on the eyes, especially as a young lady. So I think all of that was combining to make a situation where they didn't know what to do with me in the church. I didn't fit any categories of what a woman should be or should be doing or caring about because I was interested in theology and I was interested in teaching and all of that. Does that help? That's the first part. You asked for advice. Was that helpful in the conflict?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of people here can relate to that, especially the young ladies. So that's I think it's good to hear that coming from you, that this is something people have wrestled with. And again, my experience has primarily been in New Jersey. I'm a New Jerseyan, but I have noticed, like, I went to Southern Baptist Seminary. When I would go to campus, I just didn't really feel like I fit in because I'm not, I'm New Jersey. I'm not Southern, so I understand what you're saying. So is there any advice you might be able to give, just from your life experience about, how to navigate a situation like that? Or should they just keep looking till they find a church where they really feel, and again, I know these aren't easy questions, but sometimes it's good to hear some thoughts.
Well, as far as advice, I think so part of the problem too was I was an artist, and so I offered a lot of exposure to art that wasn't normative in the churches that I went to. Um, so that was, I think you mentioned that with the pastor's comments on my dancers' outfits. We actually need to say what he said because it's so powerful. He said they were slutty. So here I am offering this like worship offering, and I'm getting told that my worship is slutty. So it's very violating. So over time, I've had to deal with this, right? The whole book is about dealing with these instances in the church where people are just sort of like accosting me or affronting me. And the reason I brought up the pretty, I just realized I told everybody in this recording and wherever you're going to put it, oh, I was good to look at when I was younger. But that was kind of an important part because my very first day at church as a new believer, as I'm walking up to the sanctuary, the pastor's wife's first words to me were, "Oh, honey, we got to find you better clothes." So like that's an important piece of my story is that I was being judged for what I looked like immediately, like the very first day as a new believer. Okay, so advice. I'm a nerd and a geek, both. So nerd, related more to my academic side, and geek is to my fandoms. So I'm going to relate this over to some of my fandoms. I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. And so sometimes I look at the situation as like, okay, what would Gandalf do here? Because Gandalf knows everybody's going to fail him, right? And look, everybody around him does something dumb. They all do. I mean, Aragorn will put you in a different class, but generally speaking, the people around him that he's trying to, that he finds, pleasure in, where he finds his solace, the hobbits, they sort of all fail in different ways. But does he stop doing what's right? He never does. He just presses on because it is what is good. It is what is right. And so I kind of say I Gandalf the situation. I'm going to focus on myself first, and then I'll throw it out to how I engage the church. So I have to come to the realization that I need to do what's good because it's good, because that's what my creator wants me to do. And then so for one of my other fandoms, Star Wars, I talk about Obi-Wanning the situation because you've been taught by your master and you know what to do. You've got that knowledge and you know it's right. And the people that are the closest to you are going to fail you in the worst ways. Yes, this is talking about Anakin Skywalker. Right? So I have to say, yeah, I know that's going to happen. So what is my response, right? Obi-Wan still loved Anakin, but he had to do what was right. So again, we're back to that. You have to do what's good. And that's that passage in the Bible that we have to be as wise as serpents, but as innocent as doves. So we have to be careful with people, that we don't let them drag us down into the dark side with them. But at the same time, we have to do what's right because of our commitments to God. Now, what does that mean in a church setting? The great thing is I don't actually have to make this stuff up or think of it on my own because Jesus actually taught it in the Luke 6 passage in the Sermon on the Mount when he's discussing love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you. And then he goes into this whole thing like, what good is it if you only do good to those who do good to you? It's like, okay, Jesus, so what do I do? And he said in Luke 6:31, he says, do to others as you want done to you. Okay. So if you don't want people to gossip about you, don't be a gossip. If you don't want people to be not ungracious or to you, then don't be that way to them. Be gracious to people. If you don't want people to lack charity towards you, then be charitable towards others, right? So he sort of showed us how to do it right there in that passage. So that's the ideal. That's what I try to do is with now when I engage with churches, I don't have this unrealistic expectation of who's around me. Okay, so Gandalf, Obi-Wan. The people around me are going to fail me. It's just the way it is. What am I going to do? And then, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to treat them, even though I know they're not going to do what's right. I'm going to treat them the way I want to be treated. So that gives me a space to enter back into the church. Now, I'm not talking about serious abuse, right? I'm not talking about sexual abuse or being groomed for a situation where you're psychologically abused. I'm just talking about the everyday average people and their vices that they pride, self-righteousness, the things where they outwork their background onto you because they haven't been dealing with it. But I would say look for those people who can challenge you, but also love you where you're at and aren't doing things like what happened to me. They're not just looking at you and immediately making judgments or shuffling you off to be with your kind, that they actually are showing that they love and care for you for who you are and are interested in you and what you value and what you are interested in. And that was something I didn't find a whole lot of in the church, is that I didn't find a whole lot of people who were interested in talking about theology or any of my fandoms. That's so, I feel petty saying that. Love me for the geek that I am. Go cosplay with me at Comic-Con. Come on. Hey, I got one that will.
I was going to say, I remember in the book you mentioned being a Star Wars fan, and you probably can't see it, but back here's all my nerdy Star Wars action figure collection that I have on my bookshelf. So yeah, I was looking at how nice your background looked, and I was like, mine is so, it's like empty hooks, and so we can clearly see who's the more artistic minded.
What do we got on the pillows? Sorry, we got Tori's holding something up on her pillows there, and I don't know what she's holding up.
Oh, what is it?
Oh, she's got the Han Solo and Leia. She's got Han Solo and Leia saying, I love you. I know. That's awesome. Nice. I would have Ahsoka Tano in the background, but she's missing. I think she's off on vacation.
Great. Well, let's get a little into kind of the topic we wanted to discuss a little, which again, I barely really have read anything on this topic, and is one of the reasons we wanted to have someone come in and talk about it, because it's something that's come up before. But this idea of beauty and art, using that to point towards God. And I think the phrase you hear a lot is cultural apologetics. And I know you already shared a little of your testimony about, that was part of your testimony, that the beauty of music, and you mentioned in the book going camping and being out in nature, really having a big influence on you, and just art. And I wrote down a quote, just, you felt like God was drawing you to him through these things, and the artistry drawing us towards the artist. So any thoughts on that, or anything you want to add to that?
Oh my, yes. We could talk the rest of the night on that one. Let's kind of go back a little bit. So I was drawn to God greatly through the beauty of his creation, and not just through musical productions and the harmonies that I'm hearing, but also my dad was a huge cosmology fan. So looking out at space into the universe and seeing the just extravagant beauty that was out there, as well as the intricate beauties here in a snowflake, or, in the grandness of a sunset. So these kinds of things were really speaking to me. And what I think was happening is, as I was getting older, I was starting to have less just doing, and I started to be as a person, as I'm getting closer to my 20s. And I'm starting to say, well, what am I here for? What is this? Does my life matter? And when I do something that's, why would I think this has value, this beauty, this musical production? What is it that this is all here for? Is it just that we live and die and then we're dead? Or that Carl Sagan saying the pale blue dot, basically, and the universe is indifferent to us, and this is really for nothing? I had these kind of questions. I wasn't formalizing them that way, but that's kind of the angst that I was experiencing. So it was, to me, I was drawn greatly to God when I was reading the Bible, and I saw that there were answers there, that there is a creator behind all of this. There is a grand designer, there's an artist. And that made sense, that this beauty was for something. It's not just my perception, and it's really not important, but that it was meaningful. There was intentionality and purpose behind it. So that really greatly affected me as I'm coming into the church, reading in the Bible. Again, 20-year-old wouldn't have said it that way, but that's what I was seeing. Oh, there's an artist behind all of this. So I expected to find in the church the people who were searching for these same kinds of things that really drew me to God. I was expecting to find people who had found this great artist, who found the source of all goodness and truth, and were actively seeking to allow that to transform their lives. What a couple of things hit me so abruptly when I came into the church was that, of course, I talked about the culture. I was very different. It was very different. And I felt like there was more attention to making me a Southern Baptist than there was to making me a follower of God. So that affronted me. But also the sort of lack of beauty, attention to it. So here I was drawn to God through the great beauty in his design and in people and in his word. And then I get into the church and I notice that there's just almost no attention to it. And in fact, the kinds of churches that I have been a part of, they weren't bereft of beauty altogether, but we have a joke in the Southern Baptist Convention, and now everybody's going to know it, which is sometimes we call Baptist buildings Baptist barns, because they're functional. And now let me give you an example, as opposed to like a Catholic church, which pays attention to the beauty, the design of it, because it's supposed to say something about the creator. So it was not talked about in the church. We're bereft of it around us, surrounding us inside of our edifices. And then when I attempt to bring beauty with me, like, hey, do something that is beautiful in worship, I'm told that it is sexually perverse. So I really had to struggle with this, like, what happened? Where did the beauty of God go? Where is it? And why is it gone in the church? So I actually didn't understand that aspect, because I don't know how many of you pay attention to the argument from beauty, but I had never really experienced it. And I didn't know anything about it. Of course, I didn't know anything about apologetics either, so none of these arguments were being addressed. But it took many years. Actually, it took Keith and I went to Biola University, and that was the first time I had ever heard a Christian address beauty directly and how it impacts our view of God. And that was, Keith, that was in the cultural apologetics class with Dr. John Mark Reynolds. And he discussed it, yeah. So he really started to open my eyes to the value of beauty in showing us who God is. And one of the things I realized is that, and this was also from Dr. Phil Talon at Houston Baptist University, was that Christians, evangelical Christians, were really good at goodness and truth. So they were committed to objective good, so objective moral values, and objective truth. But they had really adopted a secular relativist position on beauty, even though goodness, truth, and beauty are from God, right? And you find them in God's own nature. So they had adopted this sort of secular view of beauty and then just released it, right? So we don't have a lot of teaching on it. We don't know what it's supposed to do or what it shows us about God. If anything, we're focused on God's goodness. So do all the right things and you'll live this like victorious Christian life. And we're focused on the truth. God is true. God's word is true. So we have these going on, but we don't say, well, now what's the beauty of God for? Is there something about an aesthetic experience that's supposed to point us on to God? And that's the thing that I noticed was completely missing, although I have only recently been able to formulate that in my mind after talking especially with John Mark Reynolds and Phil Talon, who have done. Phil did a chapter in the recent book. I think it's 20, I think it might be 20 or so arguments or a dozen arguments for the existence of God. It was a tribute to Alvin Plantinga, and he did the argument from beauty and play. That chapter really helps you see how beauty can point back to God. And I can just keep talking on this. So if you want to ask any questions there, Steve, you can just jump in.
I'm fine with just sitting back and letting you talk. Well, how would, just to give those of us, and I include myself in this, that are pretty clueless about how to make an argument from beauty to God, could you give us a little taste, or maybe have you seen anybody do it really well?
Yeah.
And is this something that you think would be effective for a non-believer? Is this better for just building up kind of the body of Christ sort of thing? Or, I mean, obviously it can be both.
Yeah. 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 I've often heard that apologetics is sort of for building up the body, but I've seen people come to Christ through apologetics. So it is a both and. Um, so I think beauty is very persuasive because it's visceral. So it's an immediate reaction to something. It's an aesthetic experience, can be taste, it can be smell, it can be sight, and it's usually immediate. Words, like when we read or we hear a lecture, sometimes it takes us a while to process things, and it takes quite a while. So we have to think through, well, what do I think about that? But beauty presents itself in a moment immediately. You are hit with this visceral reaction to it. So I think even atheists understand that there is beauty in the world, right? That's something that I think we have a point of commonality with a person who doesn't believe in God. Now, where the apologetic value will like come in for this is, well, what is beauty? First of all, what is beauty? Where is it coming from? Is it a real thing? So Alvin Plantinga goes into what gives you like warrant for using this concept, like this idea. Why do you think you have the knowledge of beauty, or what warrants that belief? So he actually goes that direction, and I haven't studied his argument, so I can't peel it apart for you. But that's one aspect of it, is that you have to justify how you're using, like why you're using the term, or why you think something's beautiful at all to begin with, ever, that this exists in our culture, or in any culture. So there's one aspect is grounding beauty somewhere. What is it, and where are we getting it from? So different guys I actually heard Daniel Dennett one time. So he's an atheist, who he was in a debate with Alistair McGrath. It was really fun, at the Greer Herd Forum in New Orleans. And he used like I think I'm saying this right, a socio-biological evolutionary perspective, in that beauty is for attracting a mate. That's all it's for. It's for sexual reproduction. And so he actually said in the debate, chicks dig the musicians. Everybody knows that, right? Chicks dig the musicians. But there seems to be an inordinate amount of beauty in the world. It seems to be excessive. So that doesn't seem to cover it. And then again, we wouldn't really know that something was beautiful per se. We would know that certain colors or lights or whatever attract us to reproduce with another thing. But it's not the concept of beauty that we all seem to understand, which is that thing has value in of itself because it's beautiful, which is different from that thing has value. I'm attracted to it for reproductive purposes. So and you can tell that we have this because when we hear, like in the last 5-10 years, when we heard about ISIS going around blowing up these, great statues and things that have been around for thousands of years, most of us were mortified that was happening. There was an indignation in us in reacting to the fact that something of beauty had just been destroyed. And I think there was in Phil Talon's article, he talks about a Rembrandt being slashed at one point. And if I were to present that to you a little more slowly and tell you the name of the piece and what it looked like, you would probably be like, oh, like a Van Gogh being just randomly slashed. We seem to think there's an inherent value that is related to this object of beauty, and the value in it is not that it has monetary value, or not that it's on canvas which we can reuse to cover a wound. It's that it is beautiful. So there's something there that is not just about sexual reproduction. So you can work that argument in that direction, that beauty it's further than just for sexual reproduction. It's more than that. That doesn't cover enough of what we're saying is beautiful. I know that Dr. Talon goes into beauty seems to expand the argument from design a bit. So the argument from design, we tend to look at it at how things function well. But if you look at the design of the universe it's not just functioning well, it's actually aesthetically pleasing. So a snowflake, like I had mentioned earlier, is beautiful when you look at it. It is an aesthetically pleasing, like, well, under under a microscope or under a looking glass. And that's going back to our biblical understanding that the heavens declare the glory of God, like the sky proclaim his handiwork, or that Romans 1 passage about how, like, we can see God's nature, his divine nature in what he has made. There's an element of who he is that is in his creation, and so we can see it. So that brings beauty into this argument from design, that not only did the creator make something that would function well, but being a perfectly good creator, he also made something aesthetically pleasing, aesthetically well. So that's another part of the argument from beauty, can point on to that there's a purpose and intention behind the beauty that we find in the world. I'm trying to, let's see, I'm looking through my notes to see if I want to go a little bit more. There's a little bit of a similarity here in the argument from beauty to the argument for objective beauty, to an argument for objective morality. And this is where I think the church needs some training, that beauty is not simply a way of describing our own response to things, like, oh, that's pretty. I feel enjoyment. I feel enjoyment because I've been presented with something I perceive as pretty or as beautiful, but that there's actually a property in the things being perceived. So like objective morality, there are things that are inherently good. Objective beauty is that when we respond to something, it was intended for us to be responsive in that way. And so a good meal, like a really nice steak, if you like steak, then that brings an aesthetic enjoyment that is an intentional and purposeful enjoyment. It says something of the nature of our universe in which we live. It points us onward to something beyond just living, just making it from day to day. So there's that argument sort of that relates over to the moral objectivity argument, which C.S. Lewis was addressing in The Abolition of Man. So I don't know how many of you read The Abolition of Man, but you can actually explore what I'm talking about when he's discussing the reactions to the waterfall, and that it was pretty or that it was sublime, that there's an appropriate reaction to something as grand as a waterfall. There's an appropriate aesthetic reaction, and it's not to like eat a hamburger and then throw the remains down in front of it, because that's not appropriate. Something's gone wrong with your aesthetic appreciation. There's some kind of perversion of your reaction. But if you stand before a grand waterfall and you say, wow, I'm in awe of that. It's powerful. That's pushing me beyond myself. That's pointing me upwards. You're cultivating an appropriate aesthetic response to that. And what that does is it helps to create in you a desire or a taste for the goodness of God, right? It's helping you create a desire or taste for the things that are pleasing to God. So you're developing your aesthetic taste. Wow, I went way over here, but where I think this connects back to the church is once we adopted the secular view that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, it's relative, it's not something we can know, we've lost an understanding that we need to develop a taste for things that are aesthetically pleasing to our Lord. And that develops our own view of his creation and the goodness of it. And so I'll wrap this little section up here with my own story. The reason I throw in, like, you know, a woman's beauty, like I got judged right off the bat, was that I think because we don't talk about beauty in the church and we don't have a theology of beauty nor a philosophy of beauty, we tend to look at women and their beauty. I'll just relegate this to women. It can be a lot of things, but with a more relativistic or pragmatic approach. We take a utilitarian perspective on it. And so beauty of a woman in utility can be used for sexual gratification, right? And if you reduce a woman's beauty down to utility or let's not rather yet, down to utility, then I can see why guys are saying things like, oh, women have to be careful what they wear. I have to be careful being around women because why? Because you might be attracted to them through their beauty and want to do the wrong thing with them, like use their beauty for your own gratification. If we trained people in the church that beauty is found in God and he placed it in his creation, then perhaps we can start seeing the beauty of each other, not just the females. The males are beautiful too if you're made in the image of God. We can start seeing that image. Her beauty is a reflection of the artistic work of God's design. It's not just for utility, right? And to reduce it down to utility is to sort of pervert it and to lack an understanding of God's own nature. So I really think there's some power here. I know I went from arguing for God's existence to sort of how we can use it in the church and how it can broaden our own perspective and our understanding of God. But I think that because I didn't have any training in the beauty of God, I was lacking something of my Lord. I was lacking some knowledge of him, which is that he wants me to enjoy him. Not just know he's true, not just know he's good. I'm supposed to enjoy God. And part of what he did was he put me around beauty to show me that, right? And it's through people, it's through the sunsets, it's through everything he put around me, music, the stars. They all point me to the fact that I'm supposed to develop a taste for my Lord. And I think that's been sorely missing in the church.